Dear listener, welcome into Other People's Shoes, Season 17, entitled Dear. This season, we venture into emotional territories as we explore words left unsent through this intimate process of writing a letter that was never meant to reach its recipient. The raw, unfiltered authenticity that speaks volumes in these letters. These unrevealed stories, confessions, and reflections held within these letters until now are powerful. Welcome to Dear. Sincerely, Other People's Shoes.
Welcome into Other People's Shoes.
You've
As you
got
know,
mail.
I am your host, Neil Matthews. Thank you so much for joining me today. Really excited that you've chosen to come over to our house and hang out. That was the thing as kids. Didn't we all do that? Didn't we always go to someone's house and play games? My big thing was G.I. Joe. Did anyone else have those, or am I alone in my obsession? By the way, the algorithm has reminded me of those sweet G.I. Joes. I keep getting Instagram reels from the 80s when they came out with those G.I. Joe commercials. I realized my childhood wasn't as bad as I thought it was because I keep seeing toys from the 80s. I'm like, I had that. I had that. Oh man, I forgot about that. I bring that up. Sometimes we forget how great someone might be, and then we get to kind of revisit it again, and lo and behold, it happens again. It's just awesome. And so today is one of those moments for me. Help me welcome in my friend David. David, how are you today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Did you have G.I. Joes as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. G.I. Joe and Star Wars.
Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot here, so brace yourself. Was there a G.I. Joe character that you liked maybe more than another?
Yeah, Snake Eyes was the one I liked the most.
Okay, he's a pretty popular one. I want to go back and watch G.I. Joe the movie, the cartoon movie that they had. I'm trying to think of his name now. Falcon was a bonehead lieutenant, messes everything up, has to go to Sergeant Slaughter to kind of get reacquainted with how to be a G.I. Joe. I think that could be a metaphor for life. Sometimes we need to get recalibrated in some respects.
Yeah.
I don't know. How you feel about that?
Yeah, no, I agree.
Well, awesome, man. Help us with this because we lead off every show typically with this question, and it's one of my favorites. What size shoes do you wear?
Size 11.
Okay, so it should be pretty easy for me to sneak into those. Now, here's my favorite question. Is there a brand or style that you're like, you know what, that's my jam. That's what I love to wear?
Yeah, Ultra, ALTRA. Those are my favorite running shoes.
Nice. There's no other brand but Ultra, right? Does it ever make you feel like Ultraman, speaking of?
No, they're unisex shoes.
All right, so anyone can wear them and they would be an ultra person, because I guess nowadays we have to distinguish. We're not man or woman, we're people. Help us with this, because again, we're in this series called Dear. The idea behind it is we're writing a letter to someone that maybe for whatever reason we can't send it to. And so for you, who is that person that comes to mind when you think about the idea of writing this letter?
My younger brother, Sean, he passed away in February of 2010. It's interesting because I have written a letter to him as a way of kind of healing. If I could actually send him a letter, I know that it would read differently.
What and why would it read differently in your mind?
The letter that I did write, I was in a lot of pain, had a lot of anger. That came through in the letter that I did write. And it's been 14 years. I've done a lot of healing. I've done a lot of growing. What I have to say now is quite a bit different than back then.
Why anger, though? The obvious question maybe, why not love and grace?
Well, when he passed away, it was very sudden. It was an overdose. He and I had a falling out on Christmas Day of 2009. On the day that he died, we had not reconciled. He left his fiance and his soon-to-be 2-year-old son. His son was just a couple months shy of his second birthday. There was a lot of anger because he had done so much work to get clean, and he was clean, and then he wasn't. And that's what took his life too soon.
Do you ever listen to rap music? You into that at all, or is it just Garth Brooks and Clint Black for you?
No, I listen to everything. Okay. So I might not know names and song titles, but, if I've listened to it, I've got a pretty good memory.
Okay.
Yeah, I like to jam out like anybody else.
All right. So you're not winning Name That Tune in X number of notes is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, no.
Okay. All right. Just check. I really like this rapper, NF, and I've used a lot of his, I'll say borrowed maybe even some of his metaphors or some of his lyrics or things of that nature. People say he's a Christian rapper, so I don't let that necessarily deter me from listening or not listening to him. I just think he has talent, clearly, to do what he does in the rap field. But he has this song that he wrote to his mom, and I think it's called Why Did You Leave? And it talks about how she lost her life due to a drug overdose. There's moments in the song where he's very angry, it seems. And then there's other moments towards the end where he is completely broken. And you hear that on the track. Like you hear him in tears, in this emotional, I would say, lack of a better wording, at least in my opinion, a breakdown emotionally. And it's a hard song to listen to for me because, and here's two reasons why. First reason is, one, I have no point of reference on that. I've never lost anyone I love to a drug overdose. So that's one. Second thing is it's his mom. Going back to the G.I. Joes again, maybe I didn't have a mom that did drugs, but I had a mom that I think was a little emotionally checked out at times. And there's a whole list of reasons why. Why do you think your brother's life and losing it had such an impact for you?
Well, there is the whole thing where we hadn't reconciled. I didn't have an opportunity to tell him what he meant to me and how important he was to me. Everything ended on such a negative note, and there's no coming back from that. To feel like the things that I said to him before he died were the last things that he would hear from me. It's a hard pill to swallow.
What stopped the reconciliation from taking place?
Stubbornness. In my mind, at that time, it was his job to make things right. You know, I could have just as easily done it. He probably thought that it was my place to reconcile.
If you could go back somehow and maybe recreate those moments surrounding maybe prior to his death, have you allowed your imagination, anything like that, to allow that to take place and what you could have said and what you would have said?
I think I would have spent some time with him alone, a time when he and I were really close and we did things together, you know, canoeing, kayaking, fishing, that sort of thing. Spend some time with him, with my daughter and his son. Could watch our kids play together. That's another thing that was so messed up, is that I wanted my daughter to have her uncle. I wanted my daughter to have her cousin and have that experience. I had that experience growing up where I had my siblings and I had my cousins. We were all very close. There wasn't a holiday that went by that we didn't connect on some level, whether it was in person or on the phone or something like that.
Sean lost his life due to a drug overdose. What maybe stopped you from heading down that road? Was it seeing what the drugs were doing to his life and you're like, okay, don't want that, I'm going to go in this other direction? Help me understand that.
No, I made a hard right turn at one point when I actually did travel down that road for a period of time. I had gone so far as to sell drugs. I sold some to this one guy who I told, you know, don't take too much of that. It was acid. Just take one. And he was like, well, I'm a big guy, you know, and he bought more than he needed and he took it all. And that night he almost murdered somebody. I felt somewhat responsible for that, and I never messed with that stuff again. Fast forward to September 8th, 2001, just a few days before the towers fell. I was on a construction site. I fell off of a 3-story roof and broke my back. I was laying on my couch on Oxycontin watching the news as the towers fell, and I dismissed it as I was watching a movie. And when I sobered up, I decided right then and there that I'd never take another opiate again. Those are two events that really solidified for me reasons for not doing drugs.
But again, I would imagine Sean probably saw you make those choices, saw you, again, you said take a hard right. Maybe you took a hard left in this situation to get away from them. For whatever reason, he continued on that path or that trajectory of what ended his life. Along the way, I'm imagining again, you were that voice to come along and say, hey, there's a better way. There's a different way. Like I'm living that, not a lording, arrogant way per se, but a way to say, hey, listen, I got out of this. You can too. What do you think kept him in that?
Well, the experience that I've had, not just with family, I was a firefighter. I saw what addiction can do to families and just what it can do to people. Opiate addiction is pretty serious. Once it gets a hold of somebody, it's seemingly insurmountable. When people feel that way, like there's no way out, it's easier to stay right there in that rut. And I can't pretend to know what that's like because I didn't go down that far. I can imagine a lot of self-loathing, depression, all of that goes along with addiction. I wish I had been a little more caring and understanding because I wasn't. It was the natural thing to do of saying, look, I did it. You can do it too. Don't be so weak. But I don't believe it's a sign of weakness to fight addiction and lose. I just think that it's one of those things that you fight, and you're going to have setbacks. And hopefully those setbacks don't end in death.
So what does life look like now that Sean is gone for the rest of the family and even for his family, for his son and for others?
Well, there's definitely a void. Every family gathering, there's always a conversation about Sean. I do see my nephew about once a year. He doesn't live in the state anymore. There's other dynamics go on with regard to that. I do talk with my nephew every weekend, talk to him on the phone, and I do have visitations, so I get to see him once a year. There is a lot of his behaviors that are so much like my brother's that there are times that I've got to excuse myself and cry a little bit. Because there's that pain is always going to be there. That void is always going to be there. The sensation just is dulled, I think, due to time.
Now help me, was Sean older than you or was he the younger brother?
No, he was younger by a couple years.
Do you feel at all because you were big brother that you should have been there? Obviously, you've kind of already talked about that a little bit, that somehow you should have been his protector, the brother's keeper. Have you allowed yourself to maybe even forgive yourself for not being there?
Yeah, that's been part of the healing process because I did carry that around with me. That was a source of anger too. And I think it's a lot easier for men to express that emotion than other emotions. Definitely it was for me. So a lot of the emotions surrounding the loss of my brother came out as anger. And it was destructive at times. I cut down every tree in my yard.
So what do you hope someone learns from you in your story with Sean and maybe just the journey that you've been on, this healing journey?
Well, there's so many lessons to learn from it. The addiction piece, having grace have to accept it as this is how it's always going to be. My loved one is an addict and that's how they're always going to be. You don't have to accept that. To have grace, know that they're struggling with demons that you don't know, you've never met. So to have that grace and still love them, I think is important. There's a lot of guilt that I carried around with me because I didn't allow myself to love my brother and let him know that I still loved him and I still cared about him and he was still important to me. I don't know that any of that would have helped him in his journey. It definitely would have helped me overcome those negative emotions.
All right. So grace is a word I feel like we hear in our society. I think most of us know what that is. But for you, when you say, I'm giving Sean grace, I'm giving the guy that cut me off in traffic grace, I'm giving a coworker grace, maybe even I'm giving my wife and kids grace. What does that mean for you when you hear that?
For me, it's very similar to forgiveness, but I think it's much more profound. You're loving them unconditionally, in spite of their faults, in spite of their shortcomings, in spite of whatever they may have done to you, how they might have hurt you. betrayal is a big thing with addiction. Being able to set that aside, not allow those negative things to paint your image of who you actually love and say, I know who you are. These things are actions that you've taken that I know are outside your character. And I'm not going to write you off because of them. I know who you are and I love you unconditionally. Doesn't mean that I'm going to excuse those things that they've done. You don't have to excuse those things. You can look past them so that you see the true person.
So I looked it up. Some people define grace as undeserved favor. Would you say that's your definition?
I think that's a good way of describing it. Undeserved, yeah, maybe. Aren't we all deserving of a little bit of grace? You know, even if it's just from ourselves.
Well, that's why I asked. Grace, I feel like almost sounds like a churchy word. I mean, I've known grace forever in the church realm, in the church circles. God gave me his grace, and so therefore he's maybe not holding the things that I've done bad against me any longer. There's a grace period when it comes to like collections and things like that. I have a certain number of days before I'm hit with a penalty. I try to give grace to people, but it is really hard in this day and age to give grace to someone, especially a total stranger. It seems a little easier if I know the person. Maybe sometimes it's harder because I do know that person. I'm like, they should not have done that. They know better than that. Grace is a hard one still for me. Grace is a hard one. And is there grace enough for this person? Is there grace enough for me to say, okay, I'm going to let him off. I'm not going to hold that against him. Grace and forgiveness kind of hold hands together and skip down the road together. It just seems hard to do sometimes. So how have you allowed yourself, like you had to kind of forgive yourself, you had to kind of give yourself some grace. How did you forgive yourself? Again, sometimes it's the whole premise of what we're talking about, this idea of these unspoken words, these unsaid things, this unsent letter. How did you go about forgiving yourself and letting yourself, okay, it's not my fault. Not again that you were excusing what you did or anything like that, but again, allowing yourself to be forgiven.
I'd say years of contemplation, therapy, talking about it, understanding that he was a grown man. He made his decisions. So many times, it was like you could tell him to do something that he knew was the right thing to do. But if you told him to do it, he would do the opposite. Just had that kind of personality, like, don't tell me what to do or I'm not going to do it. Just kind of defiant in that way. Just because I could tell him and guide him to do the right thing doesn't mean that I had that responsibility. The mistakes that I did make, they were mistakes. And I made decisions based on the information and based on my life's experiences at that time. Who I am now is not who I was then. Had I opportunity to do things over, knowing what I know now, would I do it? You know, I don't know. I don't know that I would do things differently because that would rob me of so many other experiences and wisdom that I have now that had I not gone through those trials and tribulations, I wouldn't have that now. I wouldn't have that same wisdom. I don't know. It's just conversations like this that have helped me heal over the years, you know?
Well, you mentioned the time that you get to spend with your nephew, Sean's son. What do you want to impart on him, not only about his dad, some guy traits or some manly traits or some fatherly, in a sense, not that you're his father, you can impart on him maybe some fatherly wisdom?
The times that I've spent with him, I like to do things outdoors, snorkeling, going to the springs or going to the beach. My brother was a big surfer and we always spent a lot of time outside. Nowadays, kids don't really do that too much. It's more video games, computer games, that sort of thing. And my nephew's no different. A love for the outdoors, I think, is something that I would like to impart on him. The knowledge of what a great man his father was. He was. He had his faults, so do all of us. It doesn't take away from who he was as a man. He was very loving. He was one of the funniest people I've ever known. Great father. He loved his son.
That sounds fantastic that you have chosen again to still have a relationship with him and still chosen to do your part, build into him where you can and really love him where you can and, remind him of the father figure that he has lost, at the same time carrying on that memory and the traits. So I know this about you. You have written a book. And that's pretty awesome. That's pretty exciting. Why write a book and why we share it with the world? I mean, so many times when I meet authors, had authors on in the past, on past shows, there's a reason, there's a burning, there's a desire, there's this, I have to get this message out. Was that accurate of you?
Interesting because it's directly related to the death of my brother. I was on vacation with my wife and daughter, got up early and went for a run down the beach, ran farther and faster than I normally would have. I went too far, and by the time I got done running, I was so far away from where I needed to be. Overwhelming experience. And I sat down on the beach and I looked at the water, looked at my surroundings and how beautiful everything was, really wondering what my life was all about, what was my purpose. One thing that I feel that I've learned throughout the years is we define our own purpose. We find it along the way. I wanted to share with my nephew how awesome a man his father was, and I wanted to do that by living a good life, leaving a legacy, my name, and to talk about my brother. I decided to write a book, and I was writing a leadership book, and this began in 2010. Every year that I revisited the book, I changed everything. I would learn lessons on leadership and realize that my ideas on this were not as mature as I would have wanted them to be. And so I would rewrite everything. And that's how it went until I left the fire department. And I realized that there's leadership books out there. What's going to make mine stand out in this sea of leadership books, And I decided that mine was going to be about the mistakes that I had made and how I'd overcome them and what it means to be a leader and to fail. I think that we're all kidding ourselves when we read these leadership books. Those individuals that wrote those books, they had their failures. And a lot of times where they got in their life and their career and their experiences and their accomplishments all stemmed from a failure. Maybe, maybe not. What matters is when we fail, what do we do with that experience? Do we try and hide it, or do we own it and make ourselves better for having gone through that experience? And are we willing to share with those around us the lessons learned from those failures? And so I wrote my book. There is a part where I talk about my mother and I talk about my brother, talk about the death of my brother, the death of my mother, and mistakes that I made in those relationships and regrets and that sort of thing. And the big lesson in the book is really, what do we do with those failures? Do we condemn ourselves? Do we feel sorry for ourselves because we made a stupid mistake? Or do we pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and use that experience to be a better human being and to maybe help somebody along the way that might be going through something similar?
I think that's the whole idea of life. I think my whole goal in life has switched from selfishly focused on what's in it for me and what's in it for someone else. I don't often guest on podcasts. I actually find it nerve-wracking, believe it or not. I like being the host. I don't like being the guest. Every now and then when I have guests, someone will undoubtedly ask me, hey, what's the greatest lesson you've learned in podcasting? And my answer hasn't changed in 5 years. It's still the same. And that's this. I've learned to listen. I've truly learned to listen. I thought I was a pretty good listener before, but I think the show has truly taught me to listen, and not just, again, listen with the intent to respond, really hear somebody out. And so every now and then, I think, okay, I'm doing really good. I'm listening better. I'm really applying to the things I'm learning on the show about myself and applying them to, we'll call it real life or present life when someone's in front of me. And then undoubtedly, my wife, as loving as she is, and 20 some odd years of marriage, she'll go, you really didn't listen there. It's like Candyland, back to the start. I drew the wrong card in Candyland because Candyland feels like it never ends. I don't know if anybody's ever played it. It just feels like a giant circle, like it never ends. I think the power of listening, the power of being able to hear somebody out, and the power of being able to empathize and to really, cliche as it might sound, put myself in their shoes, put myself in their perspective. What did that feel like? What did that taste like? Have you found that experience, or am I alone in that?
No, I totally agree with you. Totally.
How has it been for you when you think about the lessons learned, again, maybe in the writing process and the speaking process? And I know you've done a number of other avenues and facets to you. Why do you think listening, again, is a skill that some should have and maybe hone a little better than maybe perhaps their speaking ability?
I actually talk about it in my book. The most important piece of communication. You can even go back to the ancient Stoics, where Marcus Aurelius said it, 2 ears and 1 mouth, we should be doing twice as much listening as we do speaking. When we listen to actually hear what the other person is saying, and like you said, not to respond, to really understand that person's position, what it is that they're going through or what it is that they're feeling in that moment, to really understand them, that's really the only way that you're going to truly be able to communicate with somebody on an honest level, is if you understand them and if they understand you. And that's another reason for listening, is do they understand what I'm saying? By them telling you back what you said allows you to know that, yeah, they're listening to me as well. When it comes to leadership, that's really, to me, the foundation of leadership is communication. And the most important piece of communication is listening. Without that, you can't build a relationship. And that's, again, another key piece of leadership, is those relationships, building those relationships, building trust. If the people that you're leading don't trust you, or don't believe that you're listening or care what they have to say, why would they care what you have to say?
I think anyone could hear your story and easily say, well, David, if you just listened to Sean, maybe he's still here. If you'd have just cared more. I'm like, he doesn't need any help beating himself up, guys. The cynics in the room, come on. He doesn't need that. Is there a way we can get better at that? Is there a way you've gotten better at that? How do you become a good listener?
Patience is another skill that comes along with that. Sometimes people talk slower than your speed of listening, and you want them to hurry up, spit out what you got to say. Having that patience and asking questions to clarify, restating what somebody has said so that you can be clear that you did hear them correctly. You're fully understanding what it is that they had to say.
Is there a part in your book, when you think back on the creative process and the writing process and all the things that went involved in the book, is there a part that you go, that was really hard? That was almost an Everest. Maybe I'm over dramatic on that, but an Everest type moment. Like, I really had to climb. I really had to dig deep. I really had to find an extra gear or an extra level to get that part in, because it was really a struggle. Was that true of you?
Yeah. The part of my book where I talk about the death of my brother, and still, if I read that part of my book, I cry. It's very emotional, very raw, reliving that day. It's pretty difficult. And I wanted the book to be true. I didn't want to leave anything out. I wanted people to be able to put themselves in my shoes and understand the pain that I felt and why.
Why was that such an important piece for you? Because, you could have easily left that out.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the most life-changing moments of my life. It changed everything for me. Some good, some bad. It definitely shaped who I was moving forward from that point. And understanding that, I think, is key to understanding events that happen later.
Are you a tattoo guy?
Yep, I've got a few.
Do you have the North Carolina mascot anywhere? Asking for a friend, not for me, but just for a friend.
No, I do not.
Do you have any college mascots on your body/canvas at this moment?
Nope, I don't.
Do your tattoos, much like most people, mean something to you?
Yes. Yeah. As a matter of fact, the one on my left arm is a memorial to my brother. It's, a half sleeve, and I can describe it. There is like a gravestone with my brother's name on it. and it sits underneath a cherry blossom tree. The meaning behind the cherry blossom tree is Japanese lore. The cherry blossom tree symbolizes the transience of life. It's beautiful while it's here and it's blooming. Before you know it, all those blossoms are gone until it blooms again the following year. On the outside of my arm is a dragon that's climbing a waterfall with a koi fish in its mouth. If anybody knows the symbolism behind a koi fish, they're supposed to be powerful and they spend their life swimming upstream. They can get to the top of this waterfall. They'll transform into a dragon. That is the ultimate goal, to become a dragon. The dragon is carrying the koi to the top of the waterfall. The koi kind of represents my brother. The dragon is carrying him to the top, his ultimate goal.
Your tattoo has way, way more significance than mine does. I have to come up with a really cool story for mine. And some imagery. That was gorgeous.
Thanks.
You kind of came up with the metaphorical meshing of the understanding, making it into this allegory.
Yes. Yeah, I drew it out. I'm not an artist. Did the best that I could. And how I had it was a little bit different than what the tattoo artist came up with. And ultimately, I went with his version of it. I liked it better. There's some similarities. His way, it fit on my arm a lot nicer.
They do have that ability, those tattoo artists. My guy was mad because he didn't get creative with mine. I have a logo, quite literally, a logo of the North Carolina Ram in the sweater and everything, and the sailor hat. He was mad, pretty much already done. He didn't get to be creative. And I'm like, well, that's the whole idea. I don't want you to be creative. I want it to be easy for you. You just trace it. He goes, that's dumb. I really don't like doing those. I was like, I'm paying you good money. You can do what I ask, please and thank you. So yeah, people don't believe it, but I really do have a North Carolina tattoo. David, as we wrap up, where is the best place someone can get a copy of the book? How can they connect with you if they're interested in knowing more of your story and more of your leadership and your training? What's the best way they can learn that and do that?
They can go to my website, hollenbachleadership.com. Book is available there. It's also available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all that. Book is Fireproof, your grand strategy for transforming failure into fuel for your future. Plenty of information on my website. There is actually a page of resources. I do talk a lot about PTSD, and so I have some PTSD resources on that page.
So I want to talk about fireproofing. This is how novice I am when it comes to firefighting and all things fire. Is there such a thing as something being fireproof? Fire can't get into it and destroy it. Is that really a thing?
I think with enough fire, everything can be destroyed. There are fireproof buildings. The idea is that the fire will go out before it destroys the building. If you have enough of a fuel load, you can destroy anything with fire.
I just wonder about that in our life and maybe your life. Is there a moment where you can say right now, maybe in this moment, even with us, or in the past, or maybe in the future tense, hey, I want to have a fireproof life. I want to make sure that nothing's going to come against me that is going to eventually end up overtaking me and destroying me, such as a fire.
Well, that's the thing. And I think that's kind of a piece with the title of the book, is knowing that you are fallible. You are human. You're going to make mistakes. So how do you fireproof your life? You understand that, and you have a plan for picking yourself up off the ground when you do fall, to not allow that failure to define you, that who you are as a human is that person that doesn't give up, and that person that will use their failures to help others.
And that no matter what, you keep fighting the fire, even when you feel like all is lost, because help is really on the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's face it. I mean, I don't know if anybody else has been in a fire type situation such as yourself, whether you're fighting it or maybe you've lost your home or lost something to fire. A number of years back, my sister actually lost her apartment in a fire. Not only did she lose her apartment, many other people in our community, due to the wildfire that we had here, swept down I-5 here in Oregon. and it destroyed almost a whole town. The fire did.
Oh.
It was insane. And people were trying to get out and worried about losing their lives. And I mean, it was a pretty big thing. It was a pretty big community affected, not just one person or one people group. I mean, it was a whole community, and they're still rebuilding. And I think it was only like 3 to 5 years ago. I remember going to the ashes with my sister of where her apartment was and seeing there was nothing left. The devastation that fire can truly do. I see it on TV sometimes and I think, oh yeah, not that bad. Backdraft, not that bad. Other fire type shows, and you're like, is it really that bad? Is it really that hard to see? And Frequency, I think Dennis Quaid was a firefighter in Frequency. Was it really that traumatic? But it's a scary thing if you're walking through the fire alone, because as a firefighter, is it good to be alone in a fire or bad? Help me again with that.
No, that's very bad. Very bad. Same as diving, scuba diving. You want to have your buddy right next to you, your dive buddy, your firefighter buddy. You're a team. Equipment can fail. And when it does, you got to have somebody there to help you out.
Would you call him a fire buddy? Is that what you would call him in the department? Or is there another cooler name than fire buddy?
Yeah, I don't know that there is a term for it. So I was just improvising there.
I like fire buddy. I mean, can we get around that, or are people gonna not think that's cool because it seems like maybe a little elementary? Fire buddy. We'll go with it. David, I just want to say, man, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate what you shared. We're gonna throw your book up on our website, opspodcast.com, books that I love. We have a new designed bookshelf, and so we're gonna add your book to the shelf.
Awesome. Yeah, that would be great, man. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, again, man, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate all that you shared and all that you gave us. And man, I am glad that as much as Sean's death really affected you, I'm glad you didn't allow it to cripple you or paralyze you. Maybe it did for a moment. You found the strength and you found the resilience to continue to fight that fire, not only metaphorically, but the fires in life that came, I'm sure, with the passing of him.
Thank you for having me. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Well, guys and gals, kids and campers alike, that is it. That is all. That is our show today. That's a wrap. I couldn't help but in that last little bit there. Did you catch it? Fire buddy. I'm going to run with that. I don't have trademark skills quite yet. Maybe one day. Who's your fire buddy? Do you have one? Kind of like in Toy Story, the first one. You remember this one? They're like moving. Andy's family's moving. Remember this? And Woody, Tom Hanks' character, he says, if you don't have a moving buddy, get one. A little bit serious. But what do you do when you don't have your buddy anymore? What do you do when you don't have that person, when the flames are hot and there's fire all around you and you don't have that 911 person to call? What do you do? Maybe a point to ponder. Maybe today's the day you say, okay, I'm going to go find that person. By the way, they're not at Costco. They're not even on eBay. I checked this morning before we recorded. They're not even on Amazon. Nope. Finding that person that when it all goes bad and south, you have that person. So maybe this week you can start cultivating that type of relationship. Let me know how you do with that. opspodcast.com is a great place to let me know. You can let us know on the socials at OPS Podcast Show on our Facebook, Instagram, and X. Don't forget this as we go. Remember, when you walk in other people's shoes, you really do get a different perspective on life. I want to thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned till next week when we again walk in other people's shoes.